Hello, Rami.
Hi, Lauren.
So, hi, everybody who is watching this on Shavuot early morning. My name is Rabbi Lauren Henderson, and I'm here with my brilliant and compassionate chavruta, Rabbi Rami Schwartzer. And if you are watching this live, it is 4:40 in the 5 a.m. something in the morning, but we're recording this on Tuesday before Shavuot, so we're still feeling the ramp up into the Chag here. Just a little introduction. I am an associate rabbi at Mishkan Chicago, and as part of this Tikkun Leil Shavuot, Rami and I are going to be in conversation as a chavruta, as we normally would, just talking to each other and figuring out text in through the lens of our own lives together. And this larger Tikkun Leil Shavuot, this larger learning session that we are in the context of is exploring Torah through the lens of the Ten Commandments. And so our slot is exploring falsehood, what it means to not bear false witness to one another and to ourselves. And so in our conversation, we're going to be taking that pretty loosely. It's really exploring what self-deception means by looking at a completely different text. And this is a pretty traditional thing, like rabbis and midrash often will start in one place and then go to a totally far-flung place, and then maybe by the end wrap back to the place where they began. But we wanted to start by situating ourselves in where we're at in our current lives, because Rami and I have been learning together for many years now, have been buddies and working together for many years in our separate professional spheres, but we're both embarking on some major life transitions. So Rami, what's going on? What do you do now, and where are you about to be?
Yeah, sure. So I am currently on this call in Arlington, Virginia, just outside Washington, D.C., where I've been for the last 4 years. I suppose I'm currently the community rabbi and founding director of the Den, which is a new kind of Jewish community, mostly for 20s and 30s in the greater DC area. I came to DC 4 years ago to start this community, and now am about to embark on a new unknown kind of journey. Made the hard decision, but important decision to step aside from that community and this work for a while and embark on a period of reflection and exploration and discovery. And I don't actually exactly know what that will look like, but I know that shortly after Shavuot, I will be leaving the DC area and my community, which now has new leadership, fantastic partner, Rabbi Derek Drucker, who's there now. And I'm going to be doing some traveling, virus in mind. We'll see how that works, but I've been planning for a while to hit the road and do some traveling.
Amazing. I'm very jealous of you.
Well, you have your own exciting adventure ahead. What's up with you?
It's true. I mean, it's exciting of a very different nature. But so I am, after 4 years of being the second rabbi at Mishkan, I am finally leaving to go back to the Southeast where I grew up, although to the big city Southeast. So I grew up in Spartanburg, South Carolina, and it has been calling me back home for some time. So I'm going to be taking the position as the rabbi of a community called Or Hadash in just outside of Atlanta in Sandy Springs, Georgia. It's very exciting. I'm thrilled. It's an incredible community, but this is not quite the transition circumstances that I had envisioned a couple months ago when I was in the interview process for this job. So very much feeling a sense of Bamidbar, being in this unknown wilderness time. And I think that's kind of where we're at as a Jewish community as a whole, like what's going on. But I'm feeling it in a really particular way in my own life right now.
Yeah, and that I feel like the name of the congregation is so fitting. Right? It's a new light. You have lots of lights around you, and this one will look a little different.
That's right. So you and I met when we were buddies at JTS. And some might have even called you for quite some time the poster child. Literally, weren't you like literally the poster child?
I know my mother has gotten rid of any actual like family photos of me and just sort of, there's just ads for yeah. Yeah. Well, I spent 10 years at the seminary and loved it very much. And yeah, have been on that track for a while.
I mean, I feel like, you know, JTS is not unique in this regard, but I feel like so much of the culture, at least that I experienced at JTS, which is so much a culture of love of Torah and love of Judaism, also was trying to mold people into like a certain kind of rabbi. There's like a certain kind of vision for what success looks like in the rabbinate. And it has expanded for sure over the decades. But it was very narrow, like, okay, you're going to serve in a congregation, you're going to, you know, go through this placement process, you'll be with a community, maybe as an assistant for some years, or maybe in a solo pulpit, and then you'll be in the same community for decades, and then you'll retire and, like, you know, maybe go on some rabbi cruises or something. I don't know if it works. But
I'm still waiting for those advertisements to come in where they need a rabbi for a cruise, right? I would jump on that.
The dream. And I don't know, you and I both, I think, are like, really have been interrogating this question of what does success mean for a while. How do we measure success for ourselves? How do we measure success of our communities? Is our own personal success defined by the success of our professional endeavors? What is our worth? Like all of that. And so, you know, we're going to come back to these layers of the personal, but I think it would be useful to have a text to guide us in this journey. And so the text that we are focusing on, particularly relevant for Shavuot, is the text about the Bikurim, the first fruits that when appearing in the book of Deuteronomy, when an Israelite community comes to fully inhabit the land, there's an obligation to bring the first fruits of your crop to the priest and to the temple as an offering of gratitude. So let's start here, and then we'll see where we end up.
Awesome. I'm going to put the text here on the screen.
Great.
All right. Can you see it?
Yeah. Beautiful.
Awesome. Yeah. So I kind of wish that we still had some sort of ritual for this in our communities. I mean, I remember the shul I grew up in, they would do a couple things. They would have a lot of fruit out on the bima. Like, you know, instead of flowers, they would put beautiful spreads of, like, it looked like Thanksgiving up there. And it would also bring in all the little children and would give them little Torah. So it combined, you know, Sinai giving Torah with also seeing our little fruits.
That's so sweet.
It was very sweet. And it always made me think that we should have some kind of ritual to remember this thing here that was meant for, you know, while we say that Shavuot is about Torah, it really first and foremost was a harvest festival. And I think as we're not so connected to our land as we used to be, we're less connected to this ritual. But I'm glad we're looking at this text because I think it's really rich with a lot of meaning of what it means to bring first fruits.
And I'll say, this is not a ritual that I grew up learning about ever. It's really not a passage of Torah that I have studied actually at all in depth before looking at it with you. So excited to come and see it very, very fresh.
Yeah. And just one more thing before we dive in, we actually, I think we more so associate this passage with Pesach because this is where we get that phrase from the Haggadah, Arami Oved Avi, my father was a wandering Aramean, whatever that means, but that's a whole other conversation. So this is the part leading up to it. This is the drama before the person says, my father was a wandering Aramean.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
All right. So you want to just read out loud in Hebrew or English? We'll just do it as we do it.
Yeah, that sounds great. We can trade off a few verses.
Great.
So when you enter the land that Adonai, your God, is giving you as a heritage and you possess it and settle in it, you shall take some of, I'm going to say this in Hebrew first before we read the translation. V'lakachta mireshit kol pri ha'adama. You should take from the reshit of the fruit of your soil, which you harvest from the land that Adonai, your God, is giving you. Put it in a basket and go to the place where Adonai, your God, will choose to establish God's name. Okay.
So what we have here is, first thing, it's like you showed up. You're in the promised land. You've been wandering for 40 years. like there's some backstory here, but finally, you've arrived and you've settled via Shavuot. Like you've settled down and okay, you're collecting up this fruit. There's a big question here. We could spend the whole time on this probably. What does it mean, mereshit? What does it mean, literally, hard to translate,
I know.
from the first? I think what sounds in my mind when I hear mereshit is immediately bereshit, first word of the Torah, at the beginning, but from the beginning.
Right. So it seems like it's a temporal thing, like the first. I think that's why the translation here says first fruit. But right, are there other places, and maybe we get back to this later, are there other places where reshit is used to help us really understand what reshit means here?
Yeah, and I think when you and I were looking at this a few days ago, one of the things we're wondering about, like trying to kind of fix this image of like this farmer, like, okay, let's say I'm this farmer here, I'm harvesting up. Is this a moment where, you're walking around your field and like the first little like apple blossom, like bud of a fruit on your tree, that's like, great, that's it, that's my first fruit, even if it's this like little scrawny thing that, or is this like, is this about waiting for like this developed, ripened fruit to show up and picking the best?
Right. Well, I think the question's right on. I wonder, is it, you first said, is it one little first fruit that comes up, or is this a first seasonal thing? We've been planting now since Pesach. So by the time we hit Shavuot, we're 49, 50 days later. So that's a good, almost 2 months of growing. So is this the first fruits, meaning the first of like all the stuff that we're collecting? So there's some that are tiny and not so great, and there are some that are fat and beautiful. It's unclear what exactly we mean by first. And then you add the layer of, is it even first altogether, or is it something bigger than that?
Yeah. And there's some commentaries that kind of cut both ways. Like there's Rashi says it's first temporally, and he actually describes from this Mishnah saying, yeah, the farmer is literally walking out into his field, and as soon as he's like, the first thing that he sets his eyes on, he takes a little piece of twine and he ties it around the branch, and he's like, great, that's my bikurim, that's my first fruit, I'm gonna come back there and grab it when I have to go into the harvest. And I don't know, I didn't even think about this until now, but maybe like, maybe it actually will get like lush and beautiful by the time the harvest comes around. He's like designating it much earlier on, but then, it's like a lot of hope actually saying, okay, this thing better last because I've already designated and said, that's my one that I'm going to bring.
You're my guy. Right?
Yeah. Don't let me down now.
You know what it made me think of? It as soon as you gave the image of tying a rope around it, I think about the summers that I spent at Camp Ramah, New England. And every year, as you do with any wooded area, you have to bring in some tree people to check and make sure the trees are safe. And a couple weeks before the summer, the tree guy comes and he ties a ribbon around the trees because those are the ones we're going to cut down in a few weeks. But interestingly enough, the ones he's tying a ribbon around are necessarily the weakest and the smallest. Well, they're big actually, but some of them have withered away a little bit. He's marking the ones that are not going to last and that are in danger of falling. And so I just wonder, is it the same image or is it an opposite here, that we're tying a ribbon around a plant in our field that we know is going to come down soon? And we're going to be the ones to take it down rather than it falling and dying. I'm not sure what to do with it, but that image.
No. It's interesting. It's like you're putting a lot of hope and potential in something, but you're also saying, like, I don't know, maybe it could have grown much larger. Maybe it could have been something different, but you're actually saying like, I'm sort of diverting it to a different sort of purpose.
It's time, right? This could have changed on its own, but it's time for me to take it down.
Yeah. Okay, I'm putting a sticky on that to come back to, because we're going to come back to that whole like.
Yeah.
Okay, what does it mean?
So verse 3, go for it.
Okay, great. So once you've got your first fruit and you put it in your basket, then you shall go to the priest in charge at that time and say to him, I acknowledge this day before Adonai your God that I have entered the land that Adonai swore to our fathers to assign us. Okay, so you're like making a declaration.
Yeah.
Like
What
it
is the
happened. I arrived here.
Yeah, yeah. And I got here. There's definitely a recognition that I have arrived, but but it's not just my story. I'm actually part of a much larger narrative here. My arrival today with this crop has to do with God, of course, and with my ancestors.
Right. It was like not a foregone
culmination of a narrative. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, maybe we're saying the same thing.
Yeah, I'm the culmination of a narrative. This is not, this little fruit right here is about so much more than me. And so much more than the last 2 months of planting.
Yes. It's like this little symbol here. Okay, I'm here. And so after you make this declaration, the first part of the declaration, then the priest shall take the basket from your hand and set it down in front of the altar of Adonai, your God. So it's set down, it's offered up, and then you shall make this fuller recitation. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that the Talmud is like, this is a script, right? Like you follow this script for the letter. And there's very few of these passages, as far as I know, in Torah where it says like, literally, here's the script, read this, say this. But here it is.
Totally. I mean, the word drama keeps coming to mind. There's a real order and drama and choreography to all this.
Right. So here's what you say. Arami Oved Avi, which here is translated as, my father was a fugitive Aramean. Oved, a wanderer, or maybe Oved can mean like lost. He was sort of lost or given up somehow. He went down to Egypt with meager numbers and sojourned there, but there he became a great and very populous nation.
There's so much packed into that one beginning statement of this declaration, because it starts, here you are at the culmination of your success, bringing your fruits, and you start by saying, I come from a kind of lostness. I come from a wandering, and I come from a bewilderment in some way. However we translate Oved, there is an unrootedness of that, either physically or spiritually. And then you immediately say, I went down into a place that we know brings associations of narrowness, of challenge, of hardship. That's Egypt, with very, very little. We were nothing. And you're automatically right away bringing in the fact that from that deep, dark place, I became a great and populous nation.
Just, I mean, we are a tradition that is steeped in memory, but I feel it here in a powerful way. Like, you can't move forward in life at all without first acknowledging where you came from and who your ancestors were and what forces shaped us. So I'll put it in the first person. And this is not a pretty history. Like, I tend to sugarcoat often, but I'm just thinking, like, this is a little bit of a segue, but like, just over the last couple of years, I feel like I've been in this personal process of like really reckoning with my sides of my own family tree. I mean, actually all the metaphors of like tree-ness are really jumping out a lot right now. The tree and the lack of the rootedness, but like really trying to understand, okay, I was shaped by many more forces than I am consciously aware of, and where my ancestors traveled and what they had to deal with along the way as an inner struggle and also as an outer struggle. Those things are still like acting in my life in a deep way. Like, I'm thinking of, my grandmother on my mom's side, who passed away just over a year ago. And we found out like pretty recently in the last 2 years that she experienced a lot of trauma as a child, and a lot of neglect. And those were things that she did not talk about at all. But it was always like really even when I was a kid, I sort of knew like, oh, like something's going on. Like my grandmother's like sort of not like the other grandmothers and doesn't have that like warm, fuzzy, like cookie baking kind of like something's not connecting. And it wasn't until she was about 90 years old, she started telling people like, yes, some really awful stuff happened to me when I was a little girl. And it really shocked a lot of people at first. But she was really done hiding. Like she was really just done with it. And it all this, like, it's, you know, it's really hard to hear at first, but then it was like, oh, so much makes sense now. And for my mom, especially, like so much of this finally just adds up. I understand myself in a deeper way. Like, why is it that I'm drawn to this healing work that I'm drawn to? You know, why is it that my mom, I mean, this is sort of this wild coincidence, but like my mom went into this professional field of child abuse pediatrics, and had no idea. People would ask her like, why did you feel drawn to this? And she's like, I don't know. I just decided it was a good career. And she's like, damn, like now I know what shaped me. So I have a new respect, I think, for that work.
Yeah, well, and the fact that there's sort of an embodied memory that you're describing,
Yeah.
without ever knowing explicitly the details, that's, I think, precisely what this Israelite is saying. Is I mean, he or she refers to their father, their ancestors. They were never part of that. They weren't in Egypt, right? The whole generation of Egypt died off before they get to Israel, but they're now understanding more what this one fruit that they're picking up actually means. When you told your story, Lauren, it made me think of the philosopher Soren Kierkegaard famously saying, something like life needs to be lived forward, but it can only be understood backward. And I think that's the case for our success and our personal narratives, is maybe we can, for the most part, only really understand the decisions we've made once we look back on them. And we can do that from a place of great high and success. When we're in the trenches, it's hard to even acknowledge that. I mean, I think about how the Israelites in Egypt, and there are some passages where just after Egypt, they wished that they could go back. So they weren't even necessarily aware of just how dark their depths were until they were at the top of the mountain, until they were at Sinai, until they were in the land. Then they could look back and say, that was a really dark time.
Yeah. And then they needed that distance, I think, right? They like you said, like you can't process it when you're deep in it. So you like need it. It justifies the 40 years of wandering. And I think we beat ourselves. I don't know. I often will like, I need to make meaning of this thing right now. But like sometimes it's just like, okay, I just need to wait. And then ultimately, when I'm in this place of like, v'yashavta ba, like I can settle a little bit finally, then I can have the perspective to be able to say, oh, okay. This like was really shitty at the time.
Yeah. I wonder if it's possible for us to live our lives at the outset intentionally with that mindset. We don't have to wait till afterwards, but we can actually say, we can be v'yashavta right now in where we're at and be able to help create those circumstances.
Yeah. Okay, so moving through this, here, you want to take the next bit?
Yeah. So verse 6, the Egyptians dealt harshly with us and oppressed us. They imposed heavy labor upon us. This is more of a description of the depths that we were in.
And now he's putting himself into the story.
Yes.
Right? Like before it was a third person, like, okay, my father, my ancestors dealt with this. He became, but now it's us.
Yeah. It's also interesting to me. I know that the phrase right before it, there he became a great and very populous nation, really on the pshat, on the plain and simple level, really has to do with how like they actually multiplied and they had lots of children and they were just a few people and now they're a lot. But I also wonder, in light of that turn of third person to first person, if that also has to do with finding company. My father was wandering, went down into a dark place, and then actually found company there. And now the Egyptians are dealing harshly with us. Now we can all identify as being there.
Yeah. Like, was it, I mean, misery loves companies oversimplified, but it's kind of that idea. It's like we see each other, we see the oppression that each other is experiencing and find some sense of solidarity within that.
Yeah. And then there's the way out. And this is where we really get to our moment here. We cried to Adonai, the God of our fathers, and Adonai heard our plea and saw our plight, our misery, and our oppression. We were really seen in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if it's because of this seeing that the following could happen. Adonai freed us from Egypt by a mighty hand, by an outstretched arm and awesome power, and by signs and portents, or signs and great
miracles, wonders, something. Yeah.
God brought us to this place and gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. So I now bring the first fruits of the soil, which you, Adonai, have given me. You shall leave it. That's the end of his declaration, right? And now, after all this, I'm bringing my first fruits to you. I mean, this changes the sacrifice from being what we usually think of as sacrifices of here's my offering to God to actually, I'm doing this because bringing you this item here is how I am understanding my narrative and the course of my life and the directions it's taken me.
You know, here's what's landing with me now. Like, there's a way in which you could sort of look back at your own personal history, your community's history, and see it as this like great cosmic, like intense, dramatic battle of good versus evil and triumph. And that now you've gotten to this place of settledness. It's like, the stakes are really low now. Like, what? I'm just like a farmer. I'm just going about my day to day. Like, but to situate your current experience, like of harvest and of just like tilling the land and bringing crops in the midst of this cosmic narrative, like, what does that mean? What does it mean to situate yourself in that way?
Yeah. Well, you're commenting on the emotional experience of bringing a crop. Whereas, I mean, what I hear you saying is that you could be living a life as a farmer now, just kind of chugging along, doing your day to day and wondering where the high is. I mean, you're a nation, you've got stories of your people being, in Egypt, crossing a sea, receiving Torah on the top of a mountain. And here you are, just like hoping that the rain comes so that you can eat. And that's where I think actually this last verse here is so powerful, because the text could have stopped right there at here's the declaration, you bow low, you leave it before God and bow, and that's the end of it. But there's this last part here that you have to enjoy it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so here we are. And you shall enjoy, there's a little bit. So you shall leave it before Adonai your God and bow low before Adonai your God, and you shall enjoy this samachta, together with the Levites and the stranger in your midst, all the bounty that Adonai your God has bestowed upon you and your household. I think it's so powerful that we end with pleasure.
Yeah.
Like, again, I'm just imagining here, maybe pleasure was like a luxury that we didn't get to have for all of those years of struggle. There's like so much like, I'm not allowed to enjoy because I'm just in it for survival. And I just have to like make it to the next thing. And now finally, like, you're commanded, visamachta, settle down and be happy and actually just rejoice for a moment in community, in this, we, like you said before, we went from this experience of collective oppression and solidarity and like seeing each other in our lowness, and now we see each other and build community around pleasure and around abundance, and that just feels so different.
Yeah, what struck me is how you're describing a people that's wandering and that's striving and achieving and trying to get, there's this curve, right, from down here to up here, both physically and in their spiritual health. And that when you get here, even though the drama's over, you're supposed to enjoy it. And it almost raises the question, what do you do when you got everything you ever asked for and everything you ever wanted to achieve? And I'm not sure what this text is telling us. Is it telling us to just like sit and enjoy that? Or is there more striving to do? And yeah, and related to that, I wonder how that, we said we'd revisit this idea of reshit. I wonder how the joy we're supposed to feel relates to how we understand reshit, whether it's just our first or whether it's the best.
Oh my God, there's so many strands here that I want to follow. So let's go back to that for a moment. So for you, which one speaks to you? Giving up your first or giving up your best?
Well, I've been sitting with this for a few days because I feel like everything I've been taught in my life has been about your best. You described before a certain trajectory at the seminary, and that's certainly related, right? Being on this path for a while. I even think further back to my amazing mother, who would tell me that anything I want to do, I should do it the best, and I could do anything I want in life. And actually, I remember as I'm hearing the trash truck outside right now, I remember saying, well, like, Mom, what if I want to be a trash collector? She said, that's fine. You just do it the best. You run the company one day, right? There was always this push to do the best. And so I'm naturally drawn to make sense of reshit as the best. And elsewhere, I think in our tradition, we talk about bringing, the best of your crops. But I feel like at this juncture in my life, I'm really stunned by the message of reshit as first with Rashi's reading. It almost makes me think, what would happen if we lived our life where we brought our first draft as our final draft? We said, look, I had 2 months. I could have watered it and made it perfect, but I tied a string on it. And I said, this is going to be the one. It's the first crop that came up, and it's going to be what it's going to be. Maybe it will be the best and maybe it won't be, but I am experiencing joy in just saying to you, this is what I produced. And Lauren, in a world where I feel so much pressure to produce the best teaching, we have to compete for limited funding resources and for people's attention and spiritual devotion. I feel like we're constantly being told to be the best. And there's something so comforting and maybe on the flip side, dangerously almost escapist to say, my reshit is going to be enough.
Well, yeah, you point like there's this danger, this like palpable danger of like, and I want to name it, like, what is the risk? What is the danger? Is it that we'll become complacent? Is it that we'll be like happy with just doing the bare minimum? I think you too, like, we're type A kind of people, right? We were conditioned in this way. I'll say I got a lot of rewards, like, you get A's on your report card, you get a new pair of earrings. And it wasn't that I did it for the reward, but then I became really conditioned of like, oh, that's the thing. I'm going to point at that. And I have a strong internal narrative of laziness, of like, I feel so lazy right now. Like, I'm playing a little game on my phone for 5 minutes. Why am I being so lazy? Like, where did that narrative even come from? Why did I condition myself toward it? It's coming from our parents and from so many different places at us in society. And I think there's dangers on all sides of this too. I think there's dangers in that constant pursuit.
Yeah. If I can ask, I'm curious about how that the definition of reshit and the joy we're supposed to take from it, how that is playing out in your narrative.
Yeah, well, I feel right now that like that first drafts that you mentioned of like my reshit as my first, I have to really lean into that right now because I'm starting over. I'm starting over in a new community that I barely know, that I met once over one weekend in person and fell in love with, almost like love at first sight in this interview process, and felt a deep sense of trust of like, this is right. And a lot of fear of like, I'm a feeling of like, I'm jumping without a net. Like every every word that I utter, every like piece of Torah, or every, intuition I have about how our new community should move forward in the reopening process through, as COVID-19 kind of continues to unfold and we start to slowly come out of quarantine. I'm like, okay, I'm going to put this new thing forth. Here's an idea. No idea of how it's going to land with others. No idea. And it is, and the trust, I'm like, look, I'm searching for trust a lot. Like, okay, I have some trust and I'm trying to rely on what I do have in my relationships, but also realizing that trust is something that gets built over time and gets built back to the community here, like built out of a sense of shared experience. And that's not something I yet have with my new community. And so what will it take to build that kind of fabric of trust that then I can then like put my own first fruits out there and feel a sense of like, yes, this is it. I feel grateful to give this and that it'll be received.
Yeah. That's huge.
That's intense.
Yeah, no, and in a certain sense, kind of hopeful.
Mm-hmm.
And I would hope a bit calming. As soon as we give ourselves the permission to allow our first draft to be our final draft, which even as I say that sentence goes against everything I've been taught in school. Never write, always proofread, always write drafts. Make sure that what you put forward is polished and beautiful and your best work. But when we actually can allow ourselves, again, within reason, recognizing the dangers on the other side, when we allow ourselves to say, sometimes my first draft is good enough. I was a jazz musician in a past life, and I still miss it very much. And my band teacher, John Mastriani, used to always say in high school, he would say, it's close enough for jazz. And that's what I love about jazz, right? Is that it is improvisational and it's messy, and maybe, a percentage of the time, I don't want to say exactly what percentage, but a percentage of the time it's right on. But it's always true and authentic. And it's always your reshit. You prepare, you think, in the same way that you might prepare your crops, but ultimately what you're putting out there is always your first fruit.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So for you,
yeah,
you are kind of the opposite of via Shavtaba. You are not settling in this moment. You're about to actually like jump off the hamster wheel, as it were.
Yeah, and I think that's what struck me about your reading of Via Shavtaba is, I'm sitting with whether it's okay to be unsettled all the time. Do we have to in this moment? Is the guidance from here to always sort of find that agricultural stronghold, settle down, make our first fruits and bring them forward and be settled with that? And I actually think that in sort of a twisted way, that is the narrative that I'm pushing against right now and liberating myself from. And yet I also find inspiration for that from this text here. For me, the word reshit, which is the fulcrum of this whole thing, has to do with whether we're comparing, with how we're comparing our harvest. A beautiful poem I discovered recently that I think I shared with you by Sophie Cabot-Black. She has this great line at the end. The poem's called The Longer Prayer, and she says, "Every harvest will be weighed against the still to be done." And that phrase has sat with me for the last few weeks since I first saw it, because I think it's true in a tragic sense. I mean, I live a life where I'm always comparing my current harvest to what could be, what could have been, or what could still be. And I think that's a paralyzing idea. It is at the same time the idea that produces so much success in the world. And also it can be spiritually challenging to really enjoy it. So when I think about just saying, this is my first fruit, what I'm really saying is I'm going to just sort of settle with what I have. It's a different kind of settling. It's saying, I could work to create more of the production that I'm trying to create with my life. Or I can just say, Dayenu, right? To continue our Pesach narrative and say that this reshit is enough for me. and be satisfied with that. And so I'm trying for a little while. I don't know for how long, but I'm trying for a while to just live with my reshit and say, whatever I do today, I know it's sort of radical. It's weird to hear myself say this because this is so different from the way I've lived for so long, but to just say what I'm producing right now is okay. And I don't have to create more, better, bigger, fattier produce right now. Maybe next year, right? But right now I'm going to tie a ribbon on what I've done and just be the samachta with that.
Mm-hmm. It is quite radical. And dare I say, anti-capitalist.
Yes, quite a bit.
And I think there's that little current and thread appearing here in the Torah. Like, okay, it's enough.
So I'm curious. You started us off by bringing us through the commandment of not bearing false witness.
Oh yeah, we got to come back to that.
Yeah. So what is like? I feel like there's definitely a sense of deception here. But it may be a different kind of deception than what we usually read when we read that commandment. What's your take?
I mean, I think it has a lot of layers. I think some of this, and this is very hard to do, is about parsing out some of the layers of what we've absorbed about what success means and trying to separate the wheat from the chaff, trying to separate what does success mean for me, and that I can hold on to, and then what layers of definitions of success did I learn that I now have to unlearn. I'm really struck, back to this word of success. A couple months ago, I was in Guatemala with the American Jewish World Service, and my group of clergy were listening to a group of indigenous activists talking about their work to preserve water rights and land rights in their villages. And one of our group asked the activists, okay, so just like tell us, what does success look like for you? What does success mean? And the man looked back at us and said, in my culture, there is no word for success.
Wow.
That word, that concept does not exist because it is inherently hierarchical. It is inherently about like my success is at another person's failure, and it's a zero-sum game. And then he said, if you pressed me on it, I would say something like it's about being able to pass my heritage down to my children. That's what success would mean. And that has stayed with me these last few months. Like, oh, how much of my own narratives and striving is really about a zero sum, either or, I win, they lose kind of mentality, and how much can it be part of can I shift toward a sense of like wholeness? Like maybe what I'm aiming toward is actually wholeness rather than success.
Yeah. What I hear you deriving here is that the deception is so deep and insidious that we're not even aware of the deception, that it actually takes a lot of work to uncover it. We have to dig deep to be able to say, what is it that I want for myself? How do I define the parameters of my life and success, right? We're going to even dance with that word. And how much of that narrative comes from outside of me, and how much of that do I even want? That's really hard work to do. And it's no wonder that, in this ritual of Shavuot, with the Bikurim, with the first fruits, it takes us telling our entire story in retrospective to go back and say, okay, this is where I came from. This is the experience I had. This is where I am right now. And this is what I've produced. And I think only from that storytelling can we really disaggregate the real truth of our desires from the self-delusion that we might be accidentally engaging in.
It's beautiful. It's so beautiful. It makes me want to, it was something I've been thinking about a lot, is like, okay, I need to make the time right now as I'm entering into this transition actually to mark and celebrate everywhere that I have been, especially over these last 4 years in this particular job. And to like almost see it as a river that has like led me up until now, and then name like what were the highlights and the lowlights, what were the points, that inflection points that really shaped me, and then I can see, okay, where's it going to take me to next? Rami, we could keep doing this for a long time.
I know, but it's 4 something a.m. apparently, and it's time for the next session.
Time for Kriyat Shema, perhaps.
One thing I hope is that wherever in the world I end up, and I know that you'll be in Atlanta, that we can keep learning together. And thanks for the time here, for helping me set up my Shavuot. Thanks for inviting me into this.
Amen. Amen. Thank you to everyone who joined us in this session, and Chag Sameach.